John Hart Asher has over 14 years experience designing and building functional ecosystems within urban conditions. He has conducted basic research in ecological engineering, ecological restoration, land management, offered workshops to professionals and the general public, provided fee-supported ecological consulting expertise to clients across the United States. A few of the current projects include tallgrass prairie restoration in urban riparian corridors, green roof research and implementation, water conservation through the incorporation of low-impact development and vernal pools, soil remediation, and green infrastructure. John is going to be talking about pocket prairies, design, and installation. Please welcome John.
To advance. Yes, I'm just doing this one.
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everybody. How are you doing? Awesome. As you can tell, I have a very scary voice right now. I thought I wasn't going to have a voice last night, but we're all good to go. So to quote Samuel L. Jackson in Jurassic Park, hold on to your butts because we've got a lot of slides to go through. And we'll see what we can go through. But my name is John Hart Asher. I'm part of a woman-owned business. I'm proud to say my partners are Michelle Bertelson and Emily Manderson. We all met at the Wildflower Center, and we're part of that, the restoration consulting group there and research for years. And now we have our private firm, Blackland Collaborative. So we're going to be talking about intro to pocket prairies, but our work, going back to Blackland Collaborative, optimizes the ecological, environmental, and sociological function of landscapes. So when we work on our projects, a lot of people say, well, how do we restore this? But the key is to understand what sort of landscape function do we want out of it. We take some of those high-level goals, and then we work down and say, okay, this is going to be how we approach this restoration. Because if you hang out with a bunch of plant nerds, as I do, you will find out that there's a lot of debates on what is restoration. Can you really restore stuff? How do we know what it was? What we're trying to do is help fix a broken world. The world is on fire, if you haven't noticed. And this is a really effective way, as Doug Ptolemy and others have said, that collectively, if we do this work, it has a massive impact. And also, people are only going to conserve what they know and what they love. So we have to stop this sort of older view of conservation being people over here, nature over here. We are nature, and it is so important that when you walk out of your front door, you should expect a biodiverse landscape that's representative of your immediate ecotypes. So really quickly, what we did at the Wildflower Center when we were there, we were part of prescribed fire research. It's the longest still ongoing prescribed fire research program in the nation. And we looked essentially if you take a degraded landscape and you add fire, if you add mowing to mimic high intensity, low frequency grazing, what's it going to do? And I'll talk a little bit later about why that's important. We also do green roofs. So again, at the Wildflower Center, we spent 9 years researching about how to do green roofs in semi-arid subtropical climates. A lot of that technology was developed in temperate climates, like Germany and the UK. They brought that over here and they just sort of plug and played. Well, they brought it down here in Texas, and guess what happened? It's a little bit hotter here. It wasn't very successful, and so we figured out how to retool and redesign the components. But more importantly, too, they were using non-native sedums. And I won't go on that, that's a whole other presentation. But essentially, they couldn't handle the heat. And so we thought, well, the native plants can do it. And so this is our first project out of that research. It's called Edgeland. The owner is Chris Brown. This is in East Austin. He is a lawyer and a science fiction author, only in Austin. But he's also just written a book kind of about this called A Natural History of Vacant Lots, which is really great. And if you have Apple TV, they've done a series called Home, and on the first season, Edgeland, which is the name of this project, is featured on there, and it's a wonderful story. It's shot beautifully. But this is amazing. This is a green roof that has over 70 plus species of native grasses and forbs on it. And it's a former oil pipe line that used to go through this site. So it's really taking something and adding back. Again, this has ecological function. It ain't just pretty. It's actually doing a lot. There's the back of it. And so that's no chemicals in that pool. It's UV light treated. And that's like the most glorious bird bath in the world. Also, you can see the green roof on the bottom. This is a project that we just did on a property near downtown Austin off South Congress, where there's 13,000 square feet of Blackland Prairie that we restored. And you can see that green roof on the top as well. So it's important that we're doing this work within our urban areas because it has a massive impact on human health and well-being. But again, when we talk about diverse landscapes, we need to talk about inclusive landscapes as well. And that means thinking about other species, because when we surround ourselves with biodiverse landscapes and we include other species, we're all the better for it. Just really quickly show you what it looks like when we put in some of these roofs. So these are extensive roofs. There's intensive and extensive. Intensive, 6 feet. You can do that. We didn't have to figure that out. But we looked at extensive because they're not expensive to design for a new building. It's expensive to try to retrofit a building. But for a new building, it really doesn't add a lot of cost. So we're talking about anywhere from like 5 to maybe 12 inches of depth of growing medium. And here's one we did in Camp Young Judea in Wood Creek. And this is 6-inch depth. So it just shows you over time. There's the roof. Put in the media. There's the seed. You get the seedlings that come up within 3 to 7 days. The third picture is about 2 to 3 months. And then the bottom is about 6 months or so after that. So another one that we do is a lot of urban prairies. So this is the George Bush Presidential Center on SMU campus. I'm just going to go past that. You can see what the site used to be like. It was a degraded nothing. But we worked with MVVA Associates to look at capturing the rainwater runoff north of that building. And if you can see the image to the right, there's parking lots. We're capturing all that water. It's going through pipes, emerging through these engineered seeps to mimic nature, and it goes down. You can see this big block in the bottom. That's a 250,000 gallon rainwater cistern that captures all that water. And then that water's then used to water the trees. All of our projects, for the most part, receive temporary irrigation that first year, and then whatever the skies give them. We want to mimic that wet year. We'll talk about this with pocket prairies, but no watering whatsoever. So they estimate that they save about 6 million gallons of water by not irrigating every year, and this is about 16 acres. So you can see this now. That was that former site. These sort of shorter grass areas, that's our habiturf mix that we came up with, but there's also tall grass prairie around there. A lot of landscape architects love to do these really sexy renderings, and it's really frustrating because we're like, that's kind of far off. We're going to get there, but it's like, you planting a sapling of a live oak and then expecting that to be like a massive live oak in 2 years. But I will say within about 5 years, that's where we got that prairie. So all those, that little sort of drainage there, that's a bioswale. That's how we're moving water through the site. And you can see it's just a really beautiful area. If you haven't seen it, this past year it got tons of rain. It was amazing in terms of what it looked like. Again, this is Blackland Prairie that's restored smack in the middle of Dallas. And this was this spring right there. I mean, it just looks absolutely gorgeous. So we've impacted about 90,000 acres collectively over a bunch of different projects all over Texas. But that's a little context. Let's talk about pocket prairies, aka creative unpredictability. Because pocket prairies are not a typical formal design. You have to learn to let go. It's something where you're interacting with it. You have to interact with it. It's not no maintenance, but it's something that requires you to start a trajectory and then work with that. So why do we have pocket prairies? Right now, the current thing that everybody's fighting is lawn. Where does lawn come from? Aristocracy. Lawns were a means of showing I am so wealthy that I can have land and not do jack with it. It doesn't have to be productive. I don't have to be growing stuff. I've got enough land, I can just sit out there and walk on it. And these landscapes are really beautiful, but they aren't really plugging into all of the other species. So aesthetically, they're great, but they're what I call an aesthetic. There's nothing going on there functionally. And this is something that we're fighting because culturally this has been ingrained in us from that long, 100+ years. But if my former mentor, Dr. Mark Simmons, when he was in England, he started to go out beyond that and noticing in those lawns, though, really, they were very, very diverse. There was a lot of diversity there. But sort of what we've taken away from that is turning it into this monoculture. It's an industry, and it doesn't be anything. It's a landscape on life support. So we want to get away from that, right? We don't want to not have to water, that we spent, some cities spend up to 70% of their potable drinking water on irrigating lawns alone, and that's unacceptable. So grasslands in the United States covered a large portion, and we're really, we tend to remember, okay, right up the gut there, the center of the United States was prairie, right? Well, we're starting to understand the southeast, the United States, everybody thinks was forest. It was pine forest, but it was actually grassland that happened to have forest in it. It had the same sort of disturbance events that I'll talk about here in a second. But grasslands cover a large portion of the United States, and they're well suited to address a lot of the issues that we have before us. What are grasslands? They're disturbance-driven ecosystems. What do I mean about that? Well, these are plants up above that evolved in the face of drought. As the Rocky Mountains started to come up out in the west, they created a rain shadow and essentially created a lot of drought. And so these plants evolve with extensive root systems that go down 17+ feet. They can handle what you throw at them. Also, fire. Prescribed fire was huge. I'll show you what's called the historic return fire interval. Things burn. When you hear there's a 100-acre fire and all that, that's bad when there's structural stuff and people are affected, but it's nothing compared to what used to burn. Millions and millions of acres would burn every 3 to 5 years here in the state of Texas. And that had a profound effect because true prairies are 0 trees. Now, there's also savannas, which might be 3 to 4 trees per acre, plus herbaceous component. But the fire really kept that out. And one of the biggest threats to grasslands right now is what's called woody encroachment. How many of you have decided to do some native landscaping and you're not mowing anymore, and you're noticing there's a lot of cedar elm and hackberries? Yeah. I mean, every time I think I'm done doing stuff in my pocket prairie, I turn around, I'm like, ah! There's 30 new saplings. Oh my gosh. So fire really took care of that. Also, the bison and other ungulates, high intensity, low frequency grazing. Millions of these animals would come down, eat stuff, knock stuff down, disturb the soil, open up areas for different species to thrive, and recycle nutrients. They'd pee and poop. They were doing all of that. And they'd go away, and they might not be back for 3, 7, 28 years, just random intervals. And also there's a black-tailed prairie dog, which is a keystone species, supports over 150 other species, also aerated the land. There's a new article out in Texas Monthly about them. They're really, really great. If you have land where that range is, talk to me. I'd love to get some prairie dogs on your property. But they allow water to go deep down in. They're the beavers of the prairie. They keep the trees out because they want to see what predators are out there. So these grasslands are really based on this disturbance. Here's this historic fire interval map that I was talking about. So all that red, that burned quite regularly. Where you don't see red, there was no fire. So if you don't want fire, move to Maine. But fire is part of that. We've got to learn to not be a culture of fear, but understand how we can integrate it, because it is a very effective tool. And again, a lot of this talk about saving the world is plant trees, plant trees, plant trees, but it is terrible to plant trees where it was grassland. Because as we've seen with these droughts and with these crazy freezes, when these curveballs come, those trees just crash. But you know what thrives? The herbaceous component. So that's a lot of good intention gone bad. And again, there's an organization called the Southeastern Grasslands Institute now that are redefining the Southeast and people understanding that grasslands really did dominate even portion of that. Again, it had pine trees in there, but it was fire, it was grazers, it's all the same thing. And again, fire, prescribed fire is really great. We're starting to glean how much knowledge indigenous cultures have about how to manage the landscape. And up in Wisconsin, there are some of the best woodland managers, and they're so efficient now. Their problem is they can't move enough timber. So we've got to plug into that. And from a cost perspective, when we talk with land managers, prescribed fire is one of the most cost-effective and cheap ways to manage that landscape. And it's really fun to set the landscape on fire. But don't do it unless you have training. So, if you want to have some reference about this, we're about to get into pocket prairie, I promise. The Ecology and Management of Prairies in the Central United States by Chris Heltzer is a wonderful resource. It takes a big subject, breaks it down into small bite-sized chunks, and helps you wrap your brain about what you're about to get entailed to. Dan Flores, American Serengeti, another great one, just talks about all the animals. Because when we talk about doing these landscapes, you're not going to buy a bison and put it on the landscape in your backyard. But guess who gets to be the bison? You do. So let's talk about pocket prairies. I'm going to show you mainly stuff from my yard that I started in 2007. We'll have some other images. But 2007 brought my property. So this is where we were starting to build our new house. There's an older house there. We recycled as much of the old house as we can, put in the new. But back behind that, I'd already started doing my pocket prairie. And so always remember this, prairies are trajectories, they're not interventions. You're starting a process and you're engaging. This ain't no flower bed. This ain't no HGTV thing and you're done in a weekend. So you can see I started adding a boardwalk, and then over to the left you can see we took down a shed. On that far back right, that's the very first part of my prairie. On the left, you're like, what is all that junk? Well, that's me solarizing stuff. So we'll talk about site prep and how you need to do some things. But this just quickly give you some visual images of that. Here's where we finally, after killing a lot of stuff off, that's my wonderful wife, Bonnie. We're tilling in some compost to work with that because it's an urban soil. If you live in an urban area, your soil's probably not going to be that good. If you look at a soil web survey, it's probably going to say urban soils, and that's really just shorthand for we don't know what the heck is there. So you mend it with organic matter. Again, that's where that shed was. And then you'll seed, and then you'll plant some stuff. We're going to go into this a little bit more. But there you can see we're starting to water and already see that ceiling coming up. Here you can see all that purple Threon. I love this picture. You can see Bonnie's butt in the back. That's mainly the only reason I like to show this is she hates it. But again, you can see all that purple Threon. It's great. And then on the other side, so when I started designing mine, I started thinking, well, I'm going to have one that's mainly going to be grasses on one side, and then I'll do some forbs and bigger grasses on the other because I won't be walking around in there. But again, things shift, but that was sort of our first design. But you can see over time it started to change, different species coming in, and that's what I love. This thing is not the same every year. It changes completely differently. And it allows you, and again, you have to learn to let go. Because you start that process and it's going to keep going. I ended up putting in a water feature because I got into native fish. Don't even get me down that story, but they're really cool. But I want to do some wetland plants as well. But these are all the species that have started coming up, the bergamot, but even the seasons too. All of these freezes we have hadn't done jack to my pocket prairie. It's made it through. All right, enough about that. Let's talk about pocket prairies. So the beautiful thing about pocket prairies is they're a yes and endeavor. So you can have formal areas of your landscape and your wild component, and it can look really nice. So there you can see I'd done the formal design, added some lawn because we were about to have our kids. She wanted to have an area around there. You can see the prairie starts over here. And so you can have big blue and some lawn. And I know there's folks like Benjamin Vaught and others who are saying, you know, kill the lawn. You know, to me, it's what your land use needs to be. And I think, you know, as much land as you can put back towards habitat and restoration, do it. But it doesn't have to necessarily come at the expense of, it doesn't have to be so either or. I'm so sick of today's society being so binary. You're good, you're bad. You know, but you can change these things. And again, you can move, you know, after the kids go away, I will probably rip out a lot of that lawn. But right now, they're playing soccer and they're doing that. And it's a small little area, you know, it's nothing massive. Seasons you're going to get into. So this is Monarch Gardens, Benjamin Vaught's site. I love it because he lives in this HOA area. But you can see how his has changed. So look at that. It's all just typical lawn stuff. But look how beautiful that is. So you're going to have seasonality, and we'll talk about dormancy and all that stuff. Okay. So when you're going to do your design, the first thing you've got to understand is what are your soils? What have you got on site? So you're going to go to the Web Soil Survey. And if I could have, I would have been able to do this up here, but I couldn't today. But it takes a little bit, it's a little clunky of a program. But you're going to go in, you're going to start the program, you'll see a big map, you're going to zoom into your area. Once you get to your property, you're going to create what's called an AOI, an area of interest. So you draw a box around that. Then there's a tab called Soil Data Explorer. And don't worry, I have a link that will tell you this because it's going to be kind of hard to do this. Then you have to click a tab called Ecological Sites. Then you click a tab that says View All Ecological Sites. And then you'll see the sites and you'll click on those. But what it will show you essentially, you see I've drawn an area of interest. It shows me all these soils that are there. And with each soil it has, you can see these ecological sites, Adobe, 29, 35. You'll be able to click on those. And what that's going to bring up, you can see these ecological sites, these different types of the states of the landscape. So it's everything from its historic climax condition, so when it was its most biodiverse, to abandoned land, right? So it's been used and beat up. And it's also going to give you, not all of them, but it's going to give you what's called state transition diagrams. So number one, savanna state, that's its healthiest. But in that savanna state, it's ranging between mid-tallgrass savanna and mid-shortgrass. And then you can see there's a shortgrass savanna and then a juniper oak woodland. And then you see those arrows with R2A, T1A. Those usually will have a code, the T1B or whatever, and it's telling you what that mechanism is. Why is it driving it to that state? So for instance, I would bet you that T1A, going from healthy to that juniper oak woodland site, is lack of fire, lack of grazing, right? So it's starting to evolve into that. But more importantly, though, you're going to click on these things, and you can see it says clay prairie. This community represents the presumed historic climax condition. The dominant grass, midgrass, is Cytoscrama, composing 25% of the total composition. Other supporting midgrasses are Arizona cottontop, vine mesquite, tall dropseed, so on and so forth. Aha! Now we're starting to understand what species would have been here. Here's where we're starting to come up with our species list. And then as you scroll down, it will show you all of this stuff. So midgrasses, short grasses, cool season grasses. It'll also show you forbs. So this isn't extensive. We can't know exactly everything was there, but this is their best sort of data that they've gotten there. And this is all really for ranchers who want to create forage for their cattle. But we're going to steal it and co-opt it for our own uses, our nefarious pocket prairie uses. But this is how we start to understand, okay, these are the species I'm going to try on my site because they're probably going to do really well with your soils. You're not going to be able to get all these species. Some of them are like snowy, fluffy, snout bean, you know, green flicker flacker. Good luck finding that, you know, but it's going to help us do it. So how do you do the survey? If you just go to this web, I'm just kidding. That's a joke. I would never give you that long. If you type in, no, that was a joke. That's not a real website. I got her. No, if you go search Blanco River Design Guidelines, it's a text that we created in response to 2015 Memorial Day floods. And in the back of it, Appendix A, it has a walkthrough with how to use the soil survey. So that I know that's a lot of information. It's really hard unless we walk through it. But if you just type Blanco River Design Guidelines, the Wildflower Center hosts it for free online, and so does Texas Parks and Wildlife. It's changed a little bit, but you should get there to go through it. So that's going to give us our site and our historic climax condition. So next, once we know that, we've got to understand what currently is growing there. We're going to look at invasive species. Go to your cities and look and understand. They should have resources about, you know, what are current or the big invasive species. And if you're in between Austin and New Braunfels or Austin and San Antonio, you know, you can get Austin, you get San Antonio, there's going to be a lot of those common characters. These are a lot of the common species you're going to see around this area. And when you're doing this and you don't know all the plants, you know, if you're going to put in 70 species of native plants, it's going to be hard for you to start to learn, you know, ID all of them. But the common cast of weeds are there. And if you can start to understand what they look like, then you kind of know. But these are the common ones. King Ranch blue stem, you're going to know about it. Bermuda, Johnson grass, stuff like that, nutsedge. But this is shared, so you'll have this. There's a bunch of resources about how you deal with it, you know, how you can deal with it and all that. Listen, we use herbicide depending upon what invasive is there. We do use herbicides for Johnson grass, Bermuda. You can go the organic route, but it's like be ready to go in a boxing match with Muhammad Ali for 12 rounds. And when we prepare our sites, we do so for a year. Why? Because there's cool season and warm season invasive species. So if you just do a treatment and even you knock out some stuff and you knock out the Bermuda, well then here comes the brome in March and whatnot. So we will generally try to treat, or you can solarize like I had. If you solarize, you want to use no thinner than 6 millimeter plastic that you can get at Home Depot or Lowe's. You can roll it out, but you are going to want to leave that down. And the thing is, you got to pull it back up and spray it with water every 2 to 3 weeks, and then put the tarp back down. And you got to do that for a year. I mean, this is how we do it. You can also treat it and then put down 8 to 10 inches of mulch, which we like to do, and then you can spot treat and then remove that and then plant. But I cannot stress enough, and again, this is intro and we don't have a lot of time, but when you do this, site preparation is so important for, you know, and if it's a large scale property, I'm assuming we're talking about yards here, but if it's a large scale property, then there's different ways to go about it. But that's generally how we will address it, because if you don't deal with the invasives, there's still going to be some seed bank in there. You're still going to have to deal with it, but you've got to start. That's the foundation of your pocket prairie. And herbicides, again, I like them. You can use them surgically. Radiation's terrible, but we use it surgically to address cancers and whatnot. It's the same sort of thing. These invasives will not, some of them you cannot mechanically remove. So it's something that you have to weigh and see what you want to do. I don't value judge either way, but I cannot stress enough, you have to prepare that site. So soil work, really quickly, what is soil? Well, half of it is nothing. We like to think of soil as a bunch of stuff, but if you look at healthy soil, about 45–50% of it's void space. And that allows infiltration of water and respiration for the roots. And then you have the mineral soil stuff. Many urban soils are highly compacted, meaning that you don't get a lot of good infiltration and whatnot. So that's something you're going to have to understand too, to have compacted soils on my site. So the mineral soils, what do we mean when we talk about soils? Well, mineral soils are really that textural component that is made up of the lower horizons, essentially the parent material, the bedrock. So here, guess what that's going to be? Limestone, for the most part. But as you move up horizon, the very tip top, that's where you start to go from that parent material, and it mixes in with all that organic material. That A horizon, the O horizon is just the stuff that's breaking down, so kind of like compost. And then right below that's the A horizon, and that's the O and the A are really where the magic starts to work, and you get a lot of great stuff going on. Because we talk about soils too, we got to talk about the soil food web. Because an acre of topsoil can contain, a universe of critters. And the key thing about that is that a lot of our prairie plants have evolved with symbiotic relationships with these different microbes. So little blue stem, big blue stem, Indian grass, switchgrass are all obligatorily mycorrhizal. They cannot thrive without that symbiotic relationship. So if you go to a new site and it's raw soil, and you throw down 10,000 pounds of little blue stem, you'll get germination, but I'll be willing to bet you $100 it's not gonna be sustained and you're gonna have a crash after a while. So that's something that you've really got to understand. So, and we talk about doing soil work. That's why we wanna add compost. We'll talk about that in 1 second. And as you can see, why do we wanna do that? When we go towards a mature grassland, it should ideally be sort of 50% bacteria dominant, 50% fungal growth. And then you've got the protozoa and all the other stuff in there. But, and this is the thing, we can't even only grow about 1% of what's the microbes in the lab right now. I mean, we know more about out there than below our feet. So, so when we aim with this, a lot of the soils, especially the urban soils, they are going to be closer to that raw, degraded area where there's not a lot of life, or they're bacteria, which is sort of an early baby soil. And some of these are controlled by those invasives. So Johnson grass, for example, some invasives are what are called allelopathic, so they'll literally poison the soil and not let other stuff grow. Some of them will put out root exudant, so they'll put stuff out of their roots, and they'll keep it in a bacteria dominant state. They don't want it to evolve. So that's why Johnson grass, they have shorter flowering times, faster growing, more seed, prolific seed production, all that stuff, but they're hijacking the biogeochemical aspects of the soil. So that's why we want to talk about soil health as well. And you can see some studies they've done where they've taken former farmland. It's taken 40 years before that soil food web anyway started to resemble a mature grassland. So prairies are restoration, pocket prairies are trajectories, they're not interventions. So what are we going to do? We know what seed we're going to do. We've treated the site. Now comes the time we're going to mend the soils. We're going to get some compost. Here's all the reasons why you want to get compost. I'm pretty sure you all know what compost is and why it's good. I want to incorporate about 1 to 3 inches. You don't want to deep till when you do that because you're going to pull up a lot of invasive seed bank when you do that. So you just want to break that crust so you don't have 2 distinct horizons of loose stuff and compacted stuff. Because roots are Buddhists and they'll go the path of least resistance. So we want those, remember, we want those roots going 17 feet down, right? So we're going to incorporate that 1 to 3 inches of compost. If you can get static pile compost, do it. Don't get me started about the quality of compost nowadays. I can talk to you for 5 hours about it. But most of it's windrow produced, and that's bacteria dominant because it turns and churns and churns, allows them to meet what the U.S. Composting Council defines as compost in a short amount of time. And then versus a static pile, it won't allow fungal growth to happen because fungal growth is hyphae, like the hairs of your head, and when they turn it and turn it, it just tears it apart. So if you have static pile, just old school composting, that's the best. That's going to get you the most diverse. But you can also add amendments if you can't, because a lot of it is windrows compost. We're starting to add biochar now with our compost as well. Why? Well, we looked at that historic fire return interval map, and we know that charcoal would have been a big driver. There's plenty of data now about that supporting soil food webs, but also making nutrients more available, water retention better. It just does a lot of great stuff. And so we're starting to incorporate that in all of our compost work as well. Then you can add things like horticultural molasses, which will benefit bacteria. Organic fertilizers, do not use synthetic fertilizers. Don't use a lot of fertilizer. If you use a lot of fertilizer, you're going to get a lot of weeds. Our natives evolved in nutrient-poor conditions, or what a lot of agronomists, when we are on projects and they hire agronomists to do the soil with us, we always have these terrible discussions because they're like, well, these are poor clay soils. We've got to turn this into this other soil. And we're like, no, this is what it evolved. So a lot of our soils, the native soils, would be considered marginally poor. So you don't put a lot out there. But we want to put organic, like 2-4-2 or something, or 8-4-6 or something, low NPK, because that organic fertilizer is available to those microbes. The synthetics are only available to the plants. So we want those organics because we're feeding the soil, not necessarily the plants as much. And then liquid humate, that feeds the mycorrhizae. So there's things like that you can add. There's products like Microlife, which is a great granular fertilizer that lasts for about 30 days or so. They can put out, it's really stinky. All the organic stuff is stinky, just like the hippies. But there's other stuff, Vermiplex, Microbac. There's a lot of stuff you can put out in there. But at a minimum, if you do anything, biochar and compost. Because why? This is what we want to see. This is what we're trying to encourage. A system that is drought tolerant and resourceful. So seeding, what are we going to do? When we are ready, we've amended the soils. You have 2 windows to seed. That's October and mid-November, and then spring. October is really great for cool season grasses and forbs. If you want wildflowers, this is the time of year to do it. If you want grasses and annuals, you can do it in the spring. If you're only going to do one seeding, you can pick either or, but it tends to favor those a little more. But when we do our projects, we have very distinct seeding windows because, you know, who loves planting stuff here in August? I can't get enough of it. Love it. And then you're going to decide with your seed mix. Do you want to go with something simple? So maybe you're just going to do Phaidon grama, the state grass of Texas, and some windmill grass, and then maybe, you know, a few of these black-eyed Susans and that. Keep it very simple because you don't know a lot about the natives yet. And that way you can at least say, okay, I know these, and I can monitor. Or you can go the diverse route, you know. Native American seed and DK seed have some mixes that'll blow your minds. But it just depends on, you know, how comfortable you are with doing them. And when you're putting out the seed and you broadcast it, if you have a big property, no-till drill, that's the best. But if you can't, you throw it out by hand. But do not bury the seed. You're going to roughen the soil first, not deep till, roughen it. And then you're going to put it out, and do not bury that seed deep. Because if you bury the seed deeper than twice its width and diameter, it does not have the energy to break the surface, right? And so seed can be like Indian paintbrush seed, like the period at the end of a sentence, or Eastern gamma seed, you know, just, he's like, whatever, bury me, I'm good. But, you know, you're going to put that out. You can hand broadcast. So here you can see, for some strange reason, fires keep happening in my pocket prairie. But we clear away the vegetation, we break it, and then I get my unpaid interns to come in, and then, you know, free labor, it's okay. But you'll broadcast that seed, and then you'll lightly rake it in. You can use a tree branch, you can use a rake. And if you want to have big wildflower displays regularly, you'll do some reseeding every 2 to 3 years, because restorations lose diversity over time. Holy moly. because they don't have a lot of input coming in. You can also do live planting, so I like to do lots of drifts of later successional grasses like little blue stem, because they're growing and they're happy. Inoculates don't work that well, but if you if you plant in these, those are established and growing, then you're sort of inoculating the soil as well. So again, here's a list of some bulletproof species that probably will be growing in your neck of the woods. These grow very, very, very well. I'm going to hurry up. If I got pictures, then they'll have this as well. And then vegetation and erosion. So we don't use a lot of erosion control features like mats and stuff, because that's sort of a CYA, and that means cover your apple, a method of trying to prevent erosion. I get it, but vegetation's your most effective means of erosion control. And so if we can get that, we've seen a lot of people shoot themselves in the foot and put all this armoring down, and it prevent the vegetation from growing, and that's what we want at the end of the day. So just acknowledge it's going to be vulnerable, but things can happen, but try to do it in a way where, if you need to put in some things, like we've done super steep slope, this failed, we worked engineers to come back, and then we put in these core fiber rolls and then put soil behind those and then seeded that in. So if we can do this, this is almost one-to-one slope. I mean, you can do it. We didn't put matting and stuff all over that, but this is just an extreme example to show. But, and again, to irrigate, first 10 days, you're not going to let it dry out. The next 3 weeks, every other day, good deep watering. The next 2 weeks, twice a week. And then look to see, sort of, monitor then. If we go into La Nina, where, we had a really wet spring and even summer, and then everything turned off. So really follow that. Why? Because you want to mimic a wet year. We want to mimic that wet year. Remember, all of our projects have temporary irrigation that first year, and then it's off, and then they thrive after that. But I want to say one thing. I know everybody's here, we want to conserve our resources, but I'm a person who sort of takes a position that that's great and all, but we need to also be okay with using water wisely to reestablish habitat. So if we can use all the water to create our crops that we can eat or whatever in this habitat endeavor, I see a lot of people get hung up of, I don't want to use any water or whatever. Well, think about, with habitat restoration, it's something different. It's completely different than you watering your lawn. So do not feel bad about using water with this. Just don't be dumb about it, right? But don't feel bad. Remember, we're in this binary era of human history for whatever reason. Don't feel bad. It's yes and. This is something that's good. Adopt pace of nature. Her secret is patience. And remember, this is from my other director mentors, Dr. Steve Windhager. He took this moonscape and set out this. He did some restoration. I just love this over time. But you can see the little blue stem started coming in. And then within 4 years, he had silver blue and others. So dramatic transition, but it's not going to happen in 1 year. And then maintenance weeding really quickly. Again, fires just miraculously happen in my prairie. But this is not your grandmother's rose garden. Get in there. Be the bison. Tear stuff up. Move it around. This is a disturbance-driven landscape. It loves it. It reacts. So this has got hammered. You're going to do weeding to keep the invasives out, absolutely, but you're also going to have to do things like dethatching. There's that same area, about 2 months after that. It thrives. If you just create a pocket prairie and wall it off, you're going to end up having a woody thing or whatever. Be the bison. And here you can see the same landscape over time, just to show you there's spring, there's winter, so those go away, got a lot of eastern gamagrass and other tall stuff, and here comes dormancy. And in this October, you have to remove all that thatch. You get a weed whacker or something like that, brush that off, use that for compost. You're going to have to dethatch it. Why? Because if you don't, you're going to mulch your pocket prairie out of existence. Remember, it had fires coming through, it had grazers. However, you can leave this if you're not going to plant it. You don't have to do it every single year. Heterogeneity is what you want when you're managing your prairie. If you do the same thing every time, you're going to have it's not necessarily going to be bad, but it's going to create potentially a less diverse prairie than if you mix things up. So you can leave it up for 1 year, and I usually leave this up on portions of mine. So I'll divide mine in half and do some stuff to 1 year and some. So this year I was watering one aspect of it and then letting it go. This has gone even way drier. I mean, you can see the bare soil now. But I'm going to leave that up there too, because that dormancy, get down with brown, all of that is resources, wonderful resources for nature. That is nesting material for mammals and birds. That is overwintering habitat. That's special stuff. And we've got to stop looking at brown stuff as ugly. Coco Chanel made black and brown happen in the 30s or whatever. So why can't we do it, you know? So, you know, we don't live in England. We aren't green all the time. Let it go. And really quickly, I know I'm done, but climate change, why is this so important? They just had this report that wildlife has dropped down a staggering 73% since 1970, and it's how we interact with our landscapes. And I know that this can be very overwhelming, but again, collectively, you know, what can I do to curb this huge trend? Well, if we all do a little bit, that's a massive amount. And if you look at, we're talking about carbon sequestration, grasslands are carbon storing machines. They can store up to 1.9 metric tons of carbon per acre per year. If all the native grasslands in the United States were put back together, I know that's not realistic, but they could sequester up to 1 billion metric tons each year. And if you did all of it together, we can in theory put 10 or more gigatons of excess carbon back into the ground and establish pre-industrial levels in a matter of decades. And the UC Davis ran a model, and they said they see that the current path of global carbon emissions is the only way to do that is through grassland restoration, through 2101. So really quickly, this is what all you can expect to see. It's always changing. It's wonderful. And we do it for us, but we also do it for these. Don't be scared if things are coming in your yard, because it's awesome. It's as much of their landscape as it is yours. There's some of the prairie dog restoration we've done. Those are wonderful. But anyway, that's it. Sorry, I went long. If you have any questions.
I wish we could have drawn John out of his shell